Hello, this is Resilience Radio, and I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show and owner of Resilience Occupational Therapy. As always, the opinions on this show are not always shared by me or Resilience Occupational Therapy, and everyone has their own healthcare needs, and not every recommendation will apply to you. Today I'm here with Paul Boffa, who is a perfumer. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Irvin. Glad to be here.
So I wasn't familiar with the exact term perfumer until just today. Could you share what that definition means and what it is you do?
Well, it's actually it's a creative process besides being a maker process, which means I conceive and formulate either on my own or in conversation with my wife and business partner, Maya, the next idea for perfume. So we talk about a theme and and I liken this to composing music, because I do that too, is that there is a compositional aspect to the process, and then there is the physical application of applying what are also called notes. The singular essences are referred to as notes in a perfume. And with a mix of experience and also some trial and error is finding out what kind of formulation balance can yield plain and simply a satisfying perfume. Having said that, there's a bit that goes down the drain, but eventually, there's usually a really satisfying yield, and it when you hit it. There's sort of that eureka moment, and it's fun.
So what got you into doing perfume?
That's a rich question. I would have to say I really stepped on the rake, if that's a meaningful metaphor. Meaning if you had asked me 6 years ago, what's the last thing on earth I could imagine doing with my time and my efforts, I might have randomly said, oh, I don't know, make perfume. Because that at the time seemed like a really remote and, in fact, kind of a frivolous endeavor. I didn't, and I say this past tense, I didn't really care for perfume. And I would say that is largely to do with my my narrow experience with a world that's largely synthetic chemistry and, is ubiquitous for most all of us, whether it's perfumes or it's fragrance that is included in so many products that invade our world, whether it's shampoo, soap, dish detergent, laundry detergent, dryer sheets, car fragrance, and interior enhancers, all that kind of stuff, and then the random negative experiences of being trapped in an elevator or having an evening in a restaurant nearly ruined by someone who's wearing some loud won't quit perfume. We were in New York City several years ago during the holidays and enjoying the windows, just something that Maya and I both grew up with, either being residents of New York City or living close by. And so we took this tour in the cold weather. We decided to take a break. We just happened to be at Bergdorf Goodman and went inside and was immediately assaulted by the perfume lady in the middle of the aisle, and sprayed. And to my surprise, I was confronted with something that was really appealing for the very first time. And so I paused and I sniffed it on my wrist and started talking about it. And she, at the moment, I didn't know whether she was just playing me or if she really was surprised, but she said, "Wait a minute, who are you?" And I said, I'm just a schlub off the street. I'm nobody. And she said, no, you have a nose. You're talking about this perfume in ways that I usually don't confront. And so something's going on here. Do you have time? Long story short, we ended up going downstairs with this woman to the basement of Bergdorf Goodman, which I didn't know. Who would know? But it is where the international houses of perfume are situated. And so we had this grand tour of all these perfumers and all these essences, and that was the first explore and really a turning point. The short answer to your question is that it turns out making perfume is kind of a grand distillation, and I mean that sort of literally and figuratively, of many things that I've done in my life, including music, including gardening, and living as we do here next to the woods in the hills of Vermont, and being more attuned to smell than I realized. And so all of that sort of collided. It became this perfect storm, and Maya and I turned to each other, and for other reasons that are maybe tedious in this response, we just decided, hey, I think the writing's on the wall. We need to consider making perfume. And that was the beginning of it all about, I think, 6 years ago.
Now, Maya is a hairdresser and has Ondine, the salon in Montpelier.
Yes. Yes.
And Ondine, is that also the name for the perfume?
It is. And it's also her middle name. And it turns out at a point where, to support her salon business, and she was also making at the time and continues to make some body and hair products, that she wanted to trademark those products. And it also made sense to include perfume if we were going to get up to that as well. In the process of application, we came up against the existence of an Ondine perfume. It turns out there's this old Parisian perfume by that name from the 1960s. So the US Trademark and Patent Office said, you've got to either come up with a different name or make some kind of arrangement with the owner of the trademark. You've got 6 months. So the short of that is Maya tracked down who owned the trademark. And in the conversation, the guy said, well, to tell you the truth, I'm retiring and I'd really love to sell these trademarks. So if you're interested, you could just buy Ondine outright. So we did. And so that became the beginning of owning the trademark. And then that was, the natural context for, all right, we're doing this. We're really going to go into business and add perfume to the array of hair and body products that you already make. In fact, we're going to do this singular and dedicated line of Ondine perfumes, and that's what began and continues and grows slowly but surely.
So listeners who might listen to my podcast regularly at this point might be a little confused why we're talking about perfume. We had, to start off with, I haven't actually stated the fact that you've hinted at in your discussion of fragrances that your line is completely organic. Is that correct? Right
down to the alcohol. So there's not a stitch of it that is not organic. And on the packaging, everything that's in the perfume is transparently listed. There are no hidden surprises. It's not the kind of perfume that is, it's got a few natural essences and then the rest is stuff that you couldn't pronounce if you tried. It is absolutely 100% organic materials from start to finish. So in that, go ahead.
No, so I was going to say, aside from being a organic substitute or solution alternative, is the word I'm looking for, an organic alternative to perfume, what is, and that having potential health benefits and not having unknown fragrances, chemicals, or other things. What do you see as the health benefits or the or the intersection between therapeutics and perfume?
Great question. I would first alter what you said, looking at organic perfume as an alternative. It's actually the original. It's the OG of perfume. If you go back and if you think about it for a moment, if you go back far enough, perfume is ancient materials. I mean, we maybe in a later question I'll address the specific perfume, but we had occasion to reference the ancient Egyptian pharaohs and their burial rites. There's actually record of unguents and perfumes that the pharaohs were adorned with and buried with to move on to the next world. And so we're going back 5,000 years of recorded perfume formulation. Of course, all of that stuff was organic. There was no such thing as, at least to my knowledge, as synthetic chemistry in those days. So to rocket forward to the present, the potential intersection of perfume and wellness or health, as you may say, is that one, at the lowest bar of entry, it's not offensive. It's not unidentified, untested chemistry that may or may not have a negative impact on you. I can tell you that when we do trade shows, it's not unusual that people come by and they say, "Oh, what are you selling? Perfume? Oh, no, that's not for me. I can't do that. I'm sensitive or I'm allergic." And if we can get them to pause long enough, we find that really what they're reacting to is synthetic chemistry. And sometimes if those people are willing to take a chance, they will just not spray the perfume, but they'll just run the bottle under their nose, and they'll say ahead of that, "I'll know in a few seconds if I'm in trouble." And then they take that chance and they say, "You know what? I'm okay." And sometimes they'll even go further and say, "Oh my God, this is the first time I've been ever able to approach perfume in my entire life. This is a moment." And sometimes they even get verklempt, and some wild things happen in that theater. People, as far as health goes, emotional health, it's not unusual, and we've gotten in the habit of having a box of Kleenex on the display table, because it's not unusual for someone to come along, sample a perfume, and within a minute or two, they step back and they're in tears. And, we respond to them, and it quickly turns out that the perfume has triggered a really happy memory. Like, this reminds me of my grandmother. She died 12 years ago. She was my best friend. So there's an emotional health aspect to just that experience of healthy olfaction, that a good blend of perfume notes can trigger positive memories. And I guess there's a chance that there could be negative memories too, but that's not the fault of the perfume. That's just an intersection of a familiar scent and a memory. So there's a triggering aspect there. We've come to refer to our perfume audience as travelers, meaning these are people who are, whether they know it or not, they're ripe for movement, whether that's adventure or memory, trying something that they haven't before, graduating to something more high quality. But as far as, the thing we can't do is make medicinal claims about perfume. That's not the business that we're in. But what we can say is that the knowledge that you're applying organic materials to your body, just like the discriminating customer would choose to select organic foods, natural and organic cosmetics, and hair care, and so on and so forth, cotton clothing and wools and so on, making deliberate choices about what they consume and what they apply to their bodies and clothe themselves with, and what they sleep on, all that kind of stuff. It becomes another integrated lifestyle component, along with food and wine and clothing and body products and so on. Why not perfume?
There's something, well, one thing I wanted to mention is just my understanding of anatomy is that the olfactory sense, our sense of smell, is pretty directly tied into our limbic system, our emotional memory abilities.
Absolutely.
And how I mean, we've all had the experience where we smell something cooking and it reminds us of a grandmother's a grandmother in the kitchen, and have fond or not so fond, usually the idea is a fond childhood memory. Or I mean, and the converse can be a particular smell might be repulsive to someone because of a bad experience while they were smelling that. I've heard that they're trying to, for PTSD simulation programs for people who have been through war zones, they're trying to actually add smells to the simulations, smells of burning rubber, and trying to recreate some of the war zones for desensitizing people.
Oh,
Virtual
I
reality
hear that.
settings.
I think, and I could be behind on information, but if it's not already happening somewhere, I would almost guarantee that somewhere in the not too distant future, the ignition of scent is going to be part of watching film in theaters. That you'll have those environmental smells that'll link with the scene, and certainly whether it's smells that augment an action scene, or being in nature. It eventually, I think, will be really easy to diffuse those smells and have them, somehow digitally attuned to the sequence of the film. And so film will become ever more of a wraparound central experience. And I think that's to jump back to perfume as a link to wellness. The use of that powerful sense, as you identified, is critical to staying healthy and getting better, even if it's just simply on the level of delight. The perfume doesn't have to have a medicinal value to it, but if it has a positive emotional effect, I think we can argue easily that that's an aspect of positive health outcomes. On a clinical side, I can share with you, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a recent study from UC Irvine in California. They did a study with over 2,000 participants, and I believe a group of 50 years and older. And the exercise was to introduce singular essences that were diffused with these participants for, I think, a couple of hours at the end of their day. So let's just say early evening, their exercise was to just sort of repose with a couple hours of a singular essence. I have, not having that in front of me, I don't know what those essences were, but they did this for an extended period of time with these couple thousand plus participants, and they found that the improvement in cognition was demonstrable. Now, when I say demonstrable to you, what would you guess might be a valid and impressive percentage increase in cognition and memory in particular? What might be an attractive number to you that would raise your eyebrows?
I mean, I would think that in order for it to seem significant, I would for some reason the number 5% as a notable improvement comes to mind.
Yeah, and that would be nice because it would be notable and positive. 226% increase in cognition, memory in particular, to the point where it quickly became a consideration for treatment of dementia. So now we're taking at least the clinical application of singular essences diffused in a clinical trial. And, they did the control group without essence to validate the experiment. 226% increase in measurable cognitive factors like memory. I mean, that I had to read that a few times before it sunk in. That to me was astounding, not just like good. Oh, like, oh, that's interesting. No,
Now,
it's astounding.
now, how is this being? Do you know how this was being measured as far as like was it they took a cognitive test and then they were smelling
Yes.
something the next time around and
Mhm.
they did an assessment and they scored better, or what's?
Roughly that. Yeah. I again, without all that detail immediately in front of me, that was the structure of it. That there was a cognitive measure that was applied before the process, and I don't recall what the arc of time was, but I'm wanting to say it was a couple of weeks of repetition, and then following the the exercise, the complete arc of the experiment, the same cognitive measure was reapplied, and the average difference in performance was that massive.
So do
And
you know how
that's
long the exposure to the scent was?
for a session. It would be 2 hours.
Okay. And how many sessions do you have was it just a one-off session, or this is, you
No,
mentioned a couple of weeks, so
yeah, it was daily, and what I can't recall is what how many essences they may have exposed the participants to, or if they stuck to one. I just again, I don't recall, but just the broad stroke of it, being a couple of thousand participants over a couple of weeks, 2 hour daily exposure to these singular essences, and then these pre and post cognitive measures, just yielding this, really not surprising, but a shocking change in cognition.
yeah, that's quite incredible. I
Kind of
look forward to
cool.
reading into that more because that's
Yeah.
the implications are
I'll send it to you
absolutely.
specifically.
And I will include those in the show notes as well if
Yeah.
there ends up being an easy link to be shared.
Yeah,
Folks
because
can
I
find it
wouldn't
there.
want to just sort of, you know, shoot an arrow and not have a reference to that clinical study. So I'll share that. So yeah, I think to expand further on the potential healthful link to perfume or perfume to health, whichever way we want to see the pathway. 2020, it's June of 2020. So we're now at uh, the first explosive peak of COVID. The pandemic is just it's spiking. People are literally dropping like flies, and the infection rate is insane, as you recall. And suddenly, we're all, if not already, we're being thrust into isolation and masking. And this is also, if I remember correctly, this is before the vaccines were available. Um, so we get a call from a friend who is a healthcare chaplain. And at the time, she was working in a nursing home in Burlington. She called us to say that it was a pretty morbid set of circumstances, that patients were dying in numbers that they just couldn't deal with. The coroners were backed up, so the patients were laying in repose at the nursing home, just shrouded. And so her request was, help. I have overwhelmed staff who need some kind of a relieving perfume, if there's such a thing. And they also need something to apply to the deceased patients as a respectful anointment before they go out the door, because otherwise they are sitting here with these, I hate to use the word, but decaying bodies, and it quickly doesn't smell great. And so our answer naturally was, yes, we'll apply ourselves and get right back to you. So it was at that point that, in conversation, Maya and I recalled, well, it's ancient Egypt that very, very specifically and aggressively applied their cultural application of fragrance to the dead, and both as an ointment and an honorarium, but also as a I don't know what to call it, an unguent to sort of grease the skids into the afterlife. So I knew from having studied some Egyptian culture in college, just as an elective, that they kept a lot of great records that have been preserved over the millennia. And so it didn't take long to Google perfumes and unguents from ancient Egypt, and we got some reference to some really critical materials that are certainly still available today, like frankincense and myrrh and cypress and basil and ginger and so on. And we integrated those components into a perfume that's become known as amphora, and it's in our line. And it has those components from the ancient Egyptian formulas, like frankincense and myrrh for two. We got some great feedback on it right away, and to this day, without promoting it in this application way, we get feedback from people who tell us, oh my God, I love your amphora. It is so calming and restorative, and I actually apply it to my pillow at the end of the day before I go to sleep at night, which, it never even occurred to us. But, people experiment and they do what they will. And so this has become a cool thing. And so going forward with amphora, we don't market it as perfume for the dead, but we definitely market it as it's just sort of a restorative, calming, reviving, serene olfactory experience. And that's what people find. And it's so nice to get successful feedback in that way, that's what people are discovering with it. So there.
So one thing when I think of smells, like going back to smells being used in the movies and such, and in those therapeutic settings, one of the challenges I've heard with you can make a color palette via digitally so that everyone can see the same color. There might be fluctuations based on how someone's individual monitor puts that out. And you have, everyone knows that you've got 3 colors you can mix together and you can make the whole rainbow of colors. But there's something different about smell, which is the individual molecule is hitting the receptor. It's not necessarily a mixing in the we've got. It's not as quantifiable in terms of there being 3 different things and it's just mixing the right ratio of those 3. That it's a much more complex experience. And so there's sort of a 2-part question. One is speaking to the complexity of smell and that mixing process, and the other is, as I personally am not someone who has done much with perfumes or smelled many perfumes. However, I do like the smell of lavender and I do like the smell of cedar in different scents. That to me, having a single scent that is an essential oil that has a resonance meaning for me or seems to have a therapeutic benefit is useful. And could you speak to the benefit of the mixing versus just why not just have sage or rosemary or lavender essential oil on its own? What are you doing as a perfumer?
Let's start with the musical metaphor. If I play a single note for you, let's just say middle C on the piano, it sounds nice, right? I think we can agree, or at least agree with me for the sake of this conversation, that it's appealing. It's not offensive. It's just sort of like this singular introductory note to something that we call sound, specifically music. It's part of music. Is it a song? No. Is there a context for it? Well, yeah, there's somebody striking a note on a piano, but it doesn't tell you anything beyond that. You don't know why the person is striking that note. You don't know if that note is the beginning of a new idea. It's very limited. So what's missing is a story. And the way you build a story in music is that You collect those notes into chords. You string those notes into something we call melody. And when you put melody and chord arrangement together, you get the elements of a song. Add lyrics to it or not, but then you also have a sung lyrical story that's enhanced by the musical sound that accompanies it. It's done in time. So there's that complexity of composition, of arrangement that takes you through an arc of experience. Similarly, with perfume, if I introduce one essence to you, let's take cedar because you mentioned that. You're not excuse me, you're not inhaling one molecule. You're inhaling something you identify as cedar, but it turns out that smell already is an amalgam of many, many, many molecules, and they interact to create this bouquet that we ultimately call cedar. Oh, I know that. And you might even have images of that tree if you're familiar with it, from a landscape, from the woods or wherever. And then it also may be appealing to you. Conversely, in the world of synthetic chemistry, cedar can be extracted as what's called an isolate. An isolate is as the word implies, it's a singular isolated molecule that's extracted from the complexity in the to the cedar scent from that palette of molecules that make up cedar. What a scientist does is he or she isolates and identifies all the molecules that make up cedar, and then samples each one and decides through comparison and an experimentation that this molecule, let's just call it molecule number 79, is the one that most loudly and familiarly expresses cedar. So they extract that and they call that cedar. And that isolated singular molecule is what goes into a synthetic perfume. They'll call it cedar, and you think you're getting cedar, cedar essence in the perfume, but really you're just getting a morsel of it. If I were to identify Irving Eisenberg only by his voice, that would be familiar to people who know the sound of your voice, but would you agree that that's only a morsel of what makes up who you are, even though it's very identifiable, right? So it would be not just limiting and incomplete, but unkind to reduce you or anybody else to just one morsel of what makes them up as a person. Here's a lock of Irving's hair. You know this guy, right? Well, it would be absurd. And so I'm making that absurdity to point out at least how I feel about the almost the violation of trying to identify an essence by a singular molecule. Rose has, and I'm generalizing because the roses vary by by different varieties, but rose has something like 110 molecules that make up that smell that we identify as rose. Again, what the chemist does is to go through that molecular profile, isolate what he or she feels is the most representative, olfactory molecule, and just extract and use only that and call it rose in a synthesized perfume. What it does is it amplifies the note of rose, and I would argue that it yields what we have come to know as those loud, clawing perfumes that you can't get away from when you're like I said earlier, trapped in the elevator or trying to enjoy an evening in a restaurant, or you're in a movie theater and somebody's wearing that loud, won't quit rose perfume, and it's offensive. There's no escape from it. It's because it's incomplete. It's kind of like, I don't know. Are you fond of hot chilies?
Yeah, I like.
So the chili is a food, and it's a very like any other food. It's a complex. It's a vegetable. It's actually technically it's a fruit because it follows a flower, but they can be spicy to varying degrees, to the point of being unbearably hot. But what is done also in the world of chilies is people will extract and amplify that Campusan oil and just bottle a chili oil, which is at a magnification of heat that I don't know who finds that useful and attractive, but they're only about heat. It's not about flavor because everything else is missing. So this is um, this is where organic perfume comes into play. Is that it's returning to the complexity of composition and notes that make up an experience, an arc of experience, what the French called a sillage. And what that basically means is the initial uh, introduction of a complex perfume, the early volatile notes that are called the top notes. We experience those first because they dissipate quickest. They last for just a couple of minutes, and they tend to be bright, fresh notes, including things like citruses and bergamot, beeswax. There's certainly a whole menu of them, but they're highly volatile. They introduce the perfume, and then they interact with what follows, and those are the heart notes, which are the secondarily volatile uh, notes, chemicals that include floral notes and spices and such, and those interact with the top notes, and then eventually what are referred to as the base notes. So that's the holy triangle of a perfume: top note, heart notes, and base notes. The base notes now are the slowest volatile of the chemistry, and they tend to be resins, heavier, oilier things like vetiver, like frankincense that I mentioned earlier, like rosemary, firs, needles like spruce and balsam, and so on. Those are the longer lingering base notes. But again, the three tiers of perfume interact, and it changes over time. So what you experience with an organic perfume is this arc of changing, shifting experience that interacts with your skin chemistry and your body temperature. And so what you experience, not unlike a song, is this changing olfactory story. And after several hours, it decays and it comes to a soft, quiet close. And that's the experience. And how you participate with that, is your choice. These are also ephemeral perfumes. So unlike the experience of the synthetic perfume that I was talking about earlier, where it can take over a room, these don't. Organic perfumes have this ephemeral quality. We refer to them as intimate scents, meaning you really can't smell them much until you get close to somebody, within a few feet, within what we tend to call an intimate proximity to somebody, that is conversational, or even a touching distance to somebody. And certainly at that level of exchange, hugging somebody, you're going to smell everything about someone's body, including a perfume.
So you've got this beautiful mixing that you're describing, and I love the ephemeral quality to it, as well as the complexity. I mean, you're describing you're describing life, and the term journey that you used earlier certainly sort of fits with that. The traveler, that
Yes.
there's individual journeys and parts of your travels, and somehow the images of going to the spice trader and the smells of the marketplace, those things that come up in stories a lot, and that idea of the traveling spice salesperson, or the but what I'm wondering about is, so you've already got this, you've got sage, which is or cedar, whatever we might be working with. You got cedar, or you said rose has 100 and something molecules to it. Isn't that in its own right its own experience? What is it's already there. Nature's already mixed that for us, and then people have distilled into an essential oil. Why does it need a mixologist or a perfumer to then mix the rose with something else?
Again, like the C note, the middle C note on the piano or any instrument, it's an appealing sound. What reaches your ear and is identifiable as the singular note C, not unlike the complexity of rose, is a complex waveform that is identified as C because of the movement of the wave, the frequency of the wave, which has to do with speed. So there, even that simple singular note, the C note, has an auditory complexity to it, not unlike the profile of the singular smell of rose, which is a multi-molecular construction. Both the C note and the singular smell of rose are satisfying, and you can stop there. But there's not I would say maybe that's more of a monotone experience. We can agree again that the sound of the C note is nice, and the smell of rose is nice, but there's not a whole lot of where to go with that. Yeah, that's rose. I like it. Thanks. Or see, it sounds great. But then experientially it becomes like, well, I'm done with that. And now what? You move on to something else. There's not a composition there. There's not a story. There's not an arrangement. There's not a complex assemblage of in the case of music, notes and chords and melody. In the case of perfume, a interacting blend of essences. The interaction creates, it's not just if I play, I forgive me for bouncing between music and smell. If I play that C note for you again as an isolated note, it sounds nice. If I play that C in the context of a C major 7 chord, which includes other notes, there's now a composition that I would argue is emotionally moving. There is an architecture of sound and an interaction of those notes that, when blended together at the same time, creates an emotional experience that a C note just can't do. I guarantee that. And I'm certainly speaking from my own experience, both as a listener and as a player of music. Similarly, with perfume, rose is nice by itself, but how it interacts with other things like vetiver and vanilla and bergamot and I'm giving away secrets. I have to be careful here. There's a concert of smell that creates a bigger and lasting experience. It just has more dimension to it. So hence the bother of composing. So anybody can play that C note. Anybody can open a bottle of rose essential oil. All you have to do is experience it, and you're done. It's not something that sets anybody apart from anybody else. but the skill, and I'm not blowing my horn. I'm just saying that the exercise of blending, olfactory essences to create a different smell experience, and the emotional and memory experience that can follow is it's just a lot of fun, and I love seeing the reaction. A couple of our perfumes are environmentally intentional, and by that I mean they were conceived and constructed to reflect an environment that for us is something we really love. One of them is the ocean, and so with a lot of trial and fooling around, and with a very deliberate attempt to create a memory of a physical environment, we blended this perfume. It's not even released yet, but when it comes out, it's going to be called Atlantis, and it literally has essences of the ocean in it. There is literally seaweed extract in it. There is literally an essence of roasted seashells, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that blend the smell of ocean water and the beach, like baked sand, and the flora that grows on the dunes. So there's some essence of rugosa rose in there as well. And I want to say, I mean, we haven't shared it widely yet because, as I said, it's not released. That when you smell it, you would be, you know, taken to that waterfront environment. That's not a guarantee. There is a perfume in our line that's called 44 North, and it is named by the latitude that we live at here in the Northeast. And the intention was to blend the elements that we live with, and that includes things like birch and black spruce and honeysuckle and beeswax, and balsam and black currant, things like that, plants that we know. And I would argue to smell it really replicates and takes me into that environment. Having said that, we've shared the perfume and it sells. We've been sharing with lots of other people, and it's not just sort of a singular reaction, but it's not frequent either. But we sometimes get the response from folks that this, wild rural smelling perfume actually smells like a late night out in New York City. Go figure. You never know. So no matter what you compose, assemble, whether it's a song or a perfume, you can't predict what anybody's experience is going to be. You can only share what you've created, and and then people are on their own. Same goes for a painting. Whatever in creative intention you came to the canvas with, you don't know how people are going to react to your work. You just don't.
Yeah, so you're really describing the smell as your medium. You've been bouncing back and forth between the smell and sound, as sound is sort of the analogy for it. And you've been talking about the C note. I guess something that resonates with me is sort of the sound of water. Running water is beautiful in its own right, but if you just heard that all the time, it becomes background noise, and it becomes in and of itself is beautiful and reflective, but it's not music. The bird sound that might be near it, and the other aspects are at least what makes it interesting, even if you might call and that you're like taking the sound, the sound of the river or the smell of the rose, and you're mixing it with other things in the landscape that I think your description of the ocean and all those different parts, you're not just going, let's just smell salt water.
Yeah, well, okay, I hear that, but I'm gonna beg to differ with you about what at least if I understood you suggested, could be the monotony of running water. Um, Perhaps water coming out of a faucet would get monotonous because there are a lot of controlled and missing elements there. Um, but if I think of wild water,
Hmm.
like a stream in the woods, there is actually a complexity, again, a complexity of elements and components that create what is actually a constantly changing composition of flowing water. It's influenced by the volume and speed of the water that's flowing. It's influenced by the arrangement that may be ever shifting of the physical elements that the water is flowing over, rock and sand and sticks and whatever else is the composition of the stream there. Um, Depending on where you are in the stream, the sound's going to change. Or even if you stay in the same place, it's not going to be a constant and monotonous sounding uh, composition of flowing water.
Hmm.
And that sound, let's say you're not in that environment and standing right next to that stream, if you were to hear that recorded, I would be willing to bet your mind would go to a wild landscape because the complexity of that flowing water would invoke all those missing elements that you would see them in your mind. You would see the shade from the trees. You would maybe see the ferns on the ground near the stream. You would see the glistening reflection of the moving water. You would see the wet rocks. You would see the leaves on the ground. All of that stuff would be uh, conjured, invoked by the composition of that recording of flowing water.
Hmm.
So I think it's still like a perfume. It's still like a perfume because we haven't um, narrowed that experience of water to like just what we've all probably unfair to the Chinese, but what we've grown to call the Chinese water torture, which is just the sound of one drop of water on, I don't know, a metallic surface. It's so monotonous and sort of mono. I don't even know what the term is. Let's just call it monosonic. Um, it's crazy making after a while.
So I,
I think if you only heard a C note played again and again and again and again and again, it would eventually become maddening because there is no complexity to it. There's no change.
so I guess um I would see the drop of water on the same surface over and over again being akin to the single molecule.
Yes.
Whereas
Thank you.
the capturing of the listening to the water can be beautiful and dynamic, and that would be more akin to the smell of rose, the unsynthetic rose, or
Mm-hmm.
listening to a 5-second loop of that same water might be more akin to the rose because an essential oil is a capturing of rose. It's not the actual rose.
That's
Whereas
good.
what you're doing is you're taking the capturings of these different things and you're mixing them together to create something different.
Yes,
Something.
something. Yeah, and the what's that phrase? I don't know. The sum is greater than the parts. Um, Rose becomes identifiable in a perfume composition. Assuming that it's done well, but the rose is elevated because it's a team player. It's an element in a composition. I mean, I would argue a dozen roses looks nice, as a bouquet. Um, and then I'm not going to say tiresome, but um, it is just singular. Yes, it's beautiful, but it's singular. I would prefer to see a bouquet that includes rose and other flowers and maybe some
Hmm.
greenery. That composition is more enduring. There are more elements to discover over time. Um, just that it's more interesting.
Hmm.
And I think, again, that's that's the effort with perfume, is to have something that is ideally, I don't know, satisfying, like the painter, like the composer. The other shared aspect of making a perfume, blending a perfume, is to know when to stop. The painter has to know when to put the brush down. The composer has to know when the song is complete. You have to be careful in the studio to not overdo it, not add too many harmonies, too many instruments. You can turn it into mud if you're not careful. It's the same risk with perfume. You have to know when to stop. I know my wife Maya really well, and her name is Maya, and I named a perfume that I composed for her. It has only 7 notes in it, and I was surprised when I realized that it was complete, because often perfume has 10, a dozen or more essences in it, but this one, for reasons I can't account for, it just turned out that 7 did the trick, and it works. And it was that thing of, okay, stop it, you're done.
Well, I think that's a great note to go out on. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been fun talking about something that's just not in my typical wheelhouse of what I think about in terms of health and such. And I'm looking forward to smelling things differently.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your openness to, including this type of conversation in your theme, your podcast theme. And I thank you for your time as well. And I look forward to the final mix of the podcast. And I will share that clinical piece to you as well.
That was Paul Boffa talking about smells and perfume. And this is Resilience Radio. The music is brought to you by Aaron Marcus with their tune Some Biological Process. You can check the show notes for full credits on that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Take care.